Hi. Hope you had a nice meal. I've got the best speakers timing here to talk about my thing. But we've eaten well, so I guess everybody's happy. I'm going to tell you a little bit the story. I work on economic studies in the ADEME part of the building of construction. And the story that made the youth of this study to do something was in 2022. And we led with Megawatt, with Ile-de-France Energy. We talked about that a bit this morning, with a flex as well, which was trying to find financing solutions for individual houses, condominiums, social housing, and a certain number of recommendations derived from that. The idea was to finance the work, but not only that, also accompanying people and structuring the professional offering. So it was quite a broad, sweeping approach. And since 22, we created the innovation promise, which is kind of updating the Présentation, and we were running if this was going to work. And so we wanted to explore this whole issue a bit in the framework of a new study. In Chez-moi Logement, we gave a brief idea of what this would be, but we decided we needed a full-fledged study. So that's what this is. To have a frontal view on energy precarity with a specific approach in terms of the resources and the philosophy to help these families that are underprivileged. This corresponded at the time, we talked about it this morning, there was the energy crisis, there was the economic crisis, there were social and economic issues that were pretty strong at the time. It also corresponded to the real will to target not only the families that use the most energy, but they're also in the most difficulty about the whole aspect of the precarious nature of this type of living. So this was in two phases. First, with the diagnosis to see what specific needs did underprivileged families have, and to base that on a certain number of interviews with some bibliographies, reference work, and a focus group on beneficiaries in the Oise with case studies. And we based this on a certain number of experiences or experiments. Depending on the type of offer made, or the type of project, we could reach to kind of identify our ambitions in renovation, where things didn't exist or it was handled by some kinds of funding and so forth. And the second part were proposals. So here we created, with expert workshops with different players, the central administration, and I'd like to thank them. They're here today, notably the Ministry of the Ecological Transition and players of social accompaniment and energy renovation, and towns as well. A lot of players involved, which enabled us to raise the questions we needed to define the strengths and weaknesses of the proposals that we had. And so this wound up producing recommendations for the public authority. So we're going to be talking about the study in these three steps, but I'm going to finish with what's immediately to follow of this particular study. To start with the diagnosis, energy precarity in a few figures. 1/4 of the French declared having suffered from the cold in 22-23 for 24 hours. That's one of the indicators of energy precarity. 42% declare that the reason is a financial reason. Almost 12% of the French, whose resources are the lowest, the first decile was the lowest revenue in France, spent more than 8% of their revenue to pay their energy bills in 21. And the second indicator of energy precarity, we call that the effort rate. And owners of their own homes as well were in a category which is very modest revenue of the ANA. That's one family out of 6 owning their own home. 1 out of 6. So this is a multidimensional with many different results, many different effects. You can think what pathologies could be produced by a lack of heating. You could also have overheating. There's a question of physical health and mental health and professional insertion. Can you find a job? We talked about that over lunch. The question of education as well. We were able to observe that renovation made it possible to get back to an educational insertion and professional insertion and to have a better family life. If I'm saying all of this, it's because all of these consequences will have an influence on the perception of what good performance the renovation has. Some families didn't count these, others did. And so when they realize after the work, they consider, they see the advantage as being an advantage for the owner, right, and not for the tenant. But they don't want to change rentals because it would be too hard. So they want work that would be easy to implement and fast and with a quick gain. And this goes through single things, or a minimum number of guests for reasons of comfort and energy. I haven't finished the previous slide yet. There are a certain number of obstacles. We saw many of these already, we've spoken about, but there's really a question of the cost of work, and the cost goes way beyond just the energy renovation. There are many other things that will need to be covered, will need to be necessary. They're housing in bad condition, for example. And there's all of the costs which are harder to realize, the source of cost. It's going to be all important. For example, when you're rehousing people, the fact that you have to advance huge sums of money because the aids are received after it's already finished. So it's also the complexity of the administrative applications that you need to fill out to get this to work. So this is harder for people that are in a precarious situation than for people that are not at the limit of social exclusion. Next slide. So what about the perception? Now, for those who are afraid of what's at stake, sometimes they have attitudes that are kind of ambivalent. They're going to have high expectations, especially in terms of funding. In terms of funding, the fact that there is indeed a €1 funding, which created a whole imaginary thing for some people who think that they can get reimbursed 100% and covered by 100%. And at the same time, they have that impression, but also they say, but in any case, I'm not eligible. That happened in a whole group where nobody thought that they were eligible. The person was eligible, but they have the belief that they're not. And so, because funding is crucial, because there is aid, and we can help, we can orientate them more towards the category of precarious families. On the next slide, we can see that there's specific obstacles to the fact of going after these sources of aid, of support. And there's a relationship with what's an obstacle in terms of the works, but also soliciting the actual financial support. The whole feeling of vulnerability faced with the financiers, the time it takes to do a procedure when you're in an urgent situation. You have to change your heater, and you might have to wait months to be able to get that new heater, or to get the aid to be able to install a new heater. There's a feeling of ability or being rejected by the administration, and the procedures are perceived as being complex, and they're also afraid of getting in debt. A banking loan can be a fear of not being able to reimburse the debt. And also, your children might inherit the debt if you die, and you might not be able to have enough money to eat on if you do that work. Despite a very high rate of aid, the precarity is such that the additional expense is just too high with respect to what they need to eat. So funding is important. Financing is important to get back to what happened up until now, and what today, in terms of actual aid being provided in 2023, a huge number of energy renovation, 600 and something actions. And in 2024, the objective was 200,000 huge renovations, so kind of there's a minimum. I talk about high performance renovation as defined by law in classes A and B of DPE. But I am noting the orientations, which are really orientated towards more performance and more ambitious work, thanks to this accompaniment, with aid for the most modest of families, which are quite significant, something like 90%. There's also a high level of subsidies and a mandatory accompaniment by a person that's there to help them through the process. They're designated. So these are the three pillars, because there are three things in all of these pillars. So we really have an orientation that is decidedly there, this whole ambition of attaining performance. We're in to facilitate for the movement towards our energy renovation. So one thing to be careful about is, yes, we're going towards better performance, but there can be signals to confuse things, even if these are educational things. The fact that it's still the same for the changes in budget for 2024. And then about zero rate loans. We noted a huge progress about zero rated loans. First of all, the fact that interest rates have come back up, so it becomes interesting. Secondly, cutting your wings with the renovation effort and the Renov premium, that helped distribution as well. It simplifies the administrative aspects. But it was also a way of having easier access to to people that are going to be working on your project, not so much on the complex procedures. So now, with the changes that are ongoing, we're going to be orientated plus towards global renovation. That's something that really needs to be reinforced. Now, one of the reasons that we wanted to run the study, the analysts started in 2023. That phase of the study was in 23, but there were updates since then. Today, there are a lot of new things, and I think we'll get into more detail a bit later. But avance rénovation loans they're not reimbursed on a monthly basis. They're reimbursable after a certain time, when the succession passes along. So these are not classical solutions of obtaining a loan. Small revenue or retired or whatever. In spring of 23, it was not much. There wasn't a great distribution. And for banks, you can understand this. It's a solution that's less attractive because it was less attractive than the zero-rate loans. And they could be solicited, but they weren't very much. People weren't really after them. So in 2024, we have another formula, a new one. a zero rate for 10 years, with a ceiling reviewed to 50,000 euros. And this is reserved, theoretically, to families with very modest revenues. So this is very attractive. We'll have a look at that, but it's a very positive orientation. So a lot of resources. Now the idea, we talked about integrators, but there's a lot of skills that you need, and to assemble all of those as well. You don't necessarily have many players who have those skills other than third-party financiers. We talked about that this morning. And out of the zero-rate loans, zero-interest loans, one thing that we should mention here is the fact that the third-party distributors are distributed. There were two distributors of these types of loans, at least successfully, and the public authority applied the same provisions as banks did on all of these zero-interest loans. So these finance companies were able to distribute the whole thing. So there you are. So about the financial arrangements, there are a lot of resources and a lot of sources as well, because we talked about subsidies, the government subsidies, but there's NPR, and there's MaPrimeRénov' and lower VAT charges. These are various possibilities, and the cities and towns that also have their own assistance programs, and social players who can actually enter into the game and contribute subsidies as well. Also, there's gifts, either in time, free of charge, or actual monetary gifts from foundations. So that is payment in advance. We talked about that with Osivis. There's also bank loans and other contributors, such as the Caisse de Retraite, Action Sociale des Mutuelles, and so forth. So there are a lot of resources. And to be able to group all of this together, what's important is to see how the diversity of players enters into play. There are private players, public players, and in public areas, we've talked about that quite a bit already, in terms of l'ANA and the collective approach. But the ADEME is always working on, in the private sector, or between two, you have actors that are specialized in handling people in the situation of energy precarity and social difficulties as well. And there are people who do all of that, who can accompany families in renewing their house and taking care of the energy precarity. So you have to address your words to people in great distress to help them to get to renovation. There are private players, notably. There are a certain number of charities. So there are multiple skills involved, and collaboration should be set up to make it possible to fully accompany these people. We haven't spoken about it much, but I want to insist on the fact that the accompaniment is both technical and financial and social. We talked a lot about technical and financial, but let's not forget the social. We have specific needs in housing and for inhabitants to identify. There is funding that's adapted to those contexts. And there is truly an accompaniment that is adapted, and to establish a relationship of trust over time. So we'll be asking 3 times more appointments if compared to people that are not in a precarious nature. So ultimately, it has a real impact. We're not only trying to get a lot of aid. The idea is to move towards, multiplying the renovations being accomplished. So to reinforce this, there are a certain number of funding. There are subsidies to accompany through l'ENA Accompagnement en Rénov, and charity workers who are a way of financing it without money, and also the contribution of families. There's SLIM, which is orientated towards identification. We talked about that earlier, to propose an offer of high performance and renovation for renovation in precarious situations. So this is really specific. If we have 3 times more visits, if they're in a precarious nature, the cost can be times 3 or times 4 to help a family that's extremely defavorized. So subsequent to the diagnosis, we realized a first proposal and a first recommendation. The diagnosis resulted in the fact that we have 3 main challenges: works, accompaniment, and finance. And so you're combining different types of financing in addition to financing and loans to improve efficacy of the accompaniment measures, notably to reduce the cost, and 3, to integrate financially the work with monitoring the overall quality. So those are the 3 things. And what comes out of this is finding new means for action to add to the existing mechanisms. We're not creating something new that's just going to get rid of what was already there. We're going to base what we do on what's existing so that we can add to those approaches. So then there's feedback on the part of experts in the workshops, and they're able to challenge and feed into the proposal. We proposed the creation of an impact contract. I'm going to get back to that, but what I want to put forward is that this is used to convince all of the stakeholders that this is well-founded. The whole setting up in a cooperation between the public authorities and the private lives in the private sector. So to get into more detail of the impact contract, this is a financial partnership between investors who will be pre-funding a project and the state that will find their interest in doing this project. So this is based on a promise of impact initially that we predefined, and the investors. So we're talking about pre-funding, and if you reach the pre-funding amount, they are reimbursed with interest by the public assistance. So I'm going to get into more detail about the players involved in each of these steps, or for each of these contacts and for renovation. So the contract here has been signed between public authorities, which could be the government or an agency or some collectivity, and the investor, bank or insurance company. The beneficiary are the people that are
people living in precarious energetic conditions. We predefine the program, the way the performance criteria will be assessed. Then the operator is told this can be third-party financing company or any other social bodies. Once the program has been completed, we check whether the expected deliverables have been achieved, and then the state or public authorities can pay back the investor. Getting back to the impact contract now. I forgot to mention this, but we look at the occupying homeowner. We didn't look at the owners who are tenants. It's the people benefiting from the renovation, because they are the ones who will be blocking if the process if you affect their home, which is quite in line with what Martin said at the beginning of the session, talking about the cost of inaction, of non-action, what the cost will be in terms of unemployment benefits, national health insurance, etc., if the renovation is not complete. So the performance criteria is something that looks at the fact, the holistic view of what you don't spend here, you will spend there. So following this proposal, there's a number of recommendations that are provided. We didn't touch upon the subsidies. We were focusing on the way to address the situation of energy precarious homes. We didn't look at the subsidy. We know it's important that public subsidies are available is important, but we wanted to work on the financial support to precarious energy homes, and also the fact that if there's work to be done, it must be affordable for all pockets. And then the other thing is how to build in the new financing methods for integrated renovation projects. Globally, I mean by not only energy renovation, but any other work that may be needed, not only the energy and climate-related consideration, but also healthcare, social considerations. Therefore, to have a rather broad approach and to fund the work, the support as well. This can be done through impact contracts, as we call them. In new modes of financing, we also spoke about the voluntary contributions of businesses. And if we look at the first axis of recommendations about the structuring and financing of the support of homeowners in precarious conditions, is to make sure that the networks, support networks, be departitioned, so that we will be kind of working towards ecosystems between the state, charities, local authorities and communities, so that the stakeholders can get together, talk about the eligibility of the various homeowners, adapt the funding of the players that are in charge of support projects for energy precarious hold. So that can be NGOs that do not necessarily enjoy any grants, or players with a temporary subsidy like a C2E project. So try to provide funding over time. Second axis about these populations is to look for ways will trigger the decision making for renovation, and that will avoid any people dropping out in the course of the renovation process. So you open up the boxes of the social and psychological dimensions to ensure that the support is more efficient, to optimize the support and in terms of meetings and follow-up. And also ensuring that there's a good connection between the social workers and those working on the renovation process. We noted that the social workers were lacking training, so they need to be trained to the challenges of renovation and be given additional resources that they don't have today for this purpose. The second line of work about the funding of the work, the first thing is to improve access to adapted credit for the households, with credits that are geared more specifically to precarious household. So the households can be scored according to a number of criteria going beyond in debt, purely speaking, providing guarantees as to the to the homeowners, so they may have easy access to these credits.
Permettre aux banques de distribuer les crédits adaptés aux rénovations. Là, ça fait écho aussi à ce qu'on
So
fait
the
maintenant.
next point is
Offrir des garanties sécurisantes
also
aux prêteurs,
offering guarantees to the lenders
à la fois par
through different mechanisms.
une société
For instance,
de financement,
financing company like Fidio this morning, or other engineering contractors that could facilitate. We try to facilitate the work of the banks by factoring in the complexity of the process into the loan process. So we are beginning pre-study to look at the conditions for an impact contract to be launched. With interviews to understand the views of stakeholders. We have people, highly motivated people that we've identified. So we'll start with these people to interview them to see what motivates them and what they need. And the idea also is to see what level of investment can be expected within these impact contracts. Is it also compatible with the objectives of effective energy retrofit? So the idea will be to see how the mechanism can be organized, to have a business plan, and it's just it's about to start next week. So perhaps next time I can tell you more about this. Thank you.